Some stories begin with a scream. This one begins with silence, thick, waiting, almost sacred. The kind of silence you find only where grief and water meet. In the muddy bend of the Mississippi River, where the cypress trees lean like tired elders and the fog clings low to the roots, something barely moved. It wasn't a splash, not even a stir, just a shift in shadow, a shape out of place. A young bobcat, ribs visible, paw draped over the frayed edge of a floating log, was drifting in the slow current. He didn't thrash, didn't cry out. He simply held on. Barely a year old, muscles wasted, left hind leg swollen and unusable. But the golden eyes stayed open, watching. Spring had come too hard this year. The river had crested high and fast, swallowing dens and thinning prey. Smaller predators were pushed from the thickets, forced closer to the edges where men built cabins and left traps. This one hadn't been caught. He'd been forgotten. The land moved on. He had not. 100 yards upriver, Elias Lee Harlan pulled in his nets without hope or hurry. The rhythm had replaced language for him. Toss, drag, lift, toss again. Since his son's death, this was how he spoke to the world. Through motion, through habit, through water. His boat cut slowly through the current. Behind him, the morning fog thinned like breath on glass. And ahead, drifting just beyond the cattails, something waited. Not in fear, not in panic, but in stillness, like a question waiting to be answered. And though he couldn't yet see it, Lee's hands had already begun to slow. The river wasn't just carrying something toward him. It was bringing him back to something he didn't know he'd lost. The river that morning held its breath, not in tension, but in reverence. It was the kind of stillness that made time feel slow and heavy, like syrup poured over memory. Lee's skiff glided past the bend where the reeds thickened and the water ran darker. Cypress knees jutted like knuckled fingers through the shallows. Dragonflies hovered in place. The distant call of a barred owl filtered through the gray canopy. Everything felt suspended, as if even the wildlife had agreed to keep quiet. The bobcat floated just beyond the dockline's natural curve, his body stretched low along the slick log, fur darkened with river stain. He did not shiver. He did not blink. His stillness was not peace. It was precision, a calculation. Stay still, conserve heat, hide pain. He had once hunted this same edge, before the storms, before hunger slowed his reflexes, before the limp. He remembered rabbits darting through leaf litter, remembered the crackle of pine needles beneath his paws. But those instincts had dulled now, buried beneath a different priority: survive without being seen. The log bumped against the shallows. He didn't move. Above him, Spanish moss swayed from high branches, brushing the air like a mother's absent hand. Wild ginger bloomed unseen. Nearby, scent mingling with the faint metallic tinge of mud and wet bark. Lee stood now, net draped loosely in one hand, staring into the water ahead. He didn't know what he was watching for, but something about this stretch of river pressed memory into his lungs. The kind of memory you don't name, the kind that knows your bones before your mind does. The bobcat's eyes didn't close, not yet, but something in him had begun to listen, to the stillness, to the waiting, to the human who hadn't yet seen him, but would. He had no name. The river had not given him one, and the world had not demanded it. But he had a rhythm. 2 breaths, pause, 1 swallow. Wait. Even in weakness, the bobcat held to this rhythm. It kept him present. It gave him shape when hunger tried to blur the edges of who he was. His body, once supple with adolescent strength, now moved like something carved from wood. Slow, deliberate, spare. The injured leg dragged slightly, no longer usable for balance or pounce, but he did not whimper. Wild animals don't beg. They calculate, and he was always calculating. Instinct told him that movement invited consequence, that stillness meant less heat loss, that even when the body suffered, dignity could remain intact if one kept still long enough. A juvenile bobcat might wander up to 20 square miles alone, but he had not wandered. He had been pushed, by storms, by hunger, by time. His ears, rounded and tufted, flicked toward the sound of the approaching motorboat. Not fear, just notice. His pupils narrowed, not in alarm, but focus. If the human saw him, that would be the end of the moment. If the human didn't, he would drift another mile and start again. His body lay limp along the log, but inside him, awareness curled tight like a wire. Above, the light shifted, the sun not yet breaking through, but trying. A beam glanced off the water, illuminating the fur along his spine. His tail twitched once. He did not want help. He did not know the word. But he did want something to end. And sometimes, even in the wild, stillness isn't surrender. It's waiting for something that's never come before. But just might. When the log finally bumped against a tangle of roots near the shallows, the bobcat didn't flinch. He simply opened one eye and narrowed it again, as if even acknowledging the movement cost something he couldn't afford to spend. The leg had worsened. It dragged like a shadow, not attached to his body. Swollen near the joint, fur thinned and crusted over with a wet sheen of river mud and old blood. Infection had crept in quietly, the way cold does through a cracked window. He couldn't place the moment it began, only that now it owned him. Still, he licked it, slowly. Not with hope, but with habit. Cats clean wounds. That's what the body knows. He had not eaten in 5 days. Not fully. Not the kind of eating that restores heat to the spine and fire to the muscles. He had chased a frog 2 nights ago and missed it. The leap had failed. His paws had slipped on the algae-covered rocks, and the frog had vanished like smoke in the reeds. But he hadn't made a sound. Even now, empty-bellied and near-fevered, he kept his jaw shut. No yowl, no cry. His silence was a language the forest understood. Noise was weakness. Noise invited attention, and attention could mean death. The light shifted again, warmer now. A faint breeze stirred the reeds, ruffling the coarse fur along his shoulders. A vulture circled high above, a single dark pinwheel against the gray. The bobcat knew what vultures watched for. He just wasn't ready to be that thing yet. Pain curled in his gut. His heartbeat slowed to conserve energy. But in his eyes, that golden light still held. Because even in dying, he wanted one thing: not to disappear. Elias Lee Harlan didn't notice the log at first, or the shape on it. He was thinking about the silence in his house. It had been 11 months since his son's car went off the levee. A nighttime accident. No rain, no speeding, no answer. Just headlights in the cane grass and a call from the sheriff that came too early in the morning to mean anything else. Lee hadn't raised his voice since. Most days he didn't need to. He lived alone now in a wood frame house that had belonged to his grandfather, back when boats outnumbered cars on this stretch of river. He fixed what needed fixing, ignored what didn't, and fished because it gave him something to hold. He didn't fish for sport, and not for food either. He rarely kept what he caught. What mattered was the feel of the line in his hands, the quiet strain of effort met by resistance. Proof that something else in the world still pulled back. That morning, the sky sat low, gray as pewter. Lee's boots were damp from the dew-heavy grass. He launched his skiff with practiced ease, thermos clinking against the anchor, the net coiled near his feet. He didn't notice the shape near the reeds until he was almost past it. A log, he thought, until he saw it shift. Just once. He cut the motor instinctively. Let the boat drift. The shape didn't move again. Lee squinted, one hand shielding his eyes. Whatever it was hadn't flinched at the sound of the motor. That meant something. Out here, wild things didn't stay still unless they were sleeping, or near the edge of not waking up. He reached for the net, not to throw it, just to feel it. Old habits. Old grief. The skiff coasted to a lazy halt, the current nudging its hull softly against a drift of reeds. Lee remained still, hands resting lightly on the rim of the boat, eyes locked on the unmoving shape. It wasn't a log. It wasn't a dog either. Too lean, too narrow through the hips. And the ears? They were pointed, tufted, turning slightly in his direction even though the body lay motionless. Bobcat. Young, but not a cub. Lee exhaled slowly, not out of fear, but recognition. He'd seen one years ago on a hunting trip with his brother, back when both men still laughed. That one had vanished the second it noticed them. This one didn't move. Lee didn't speak. Not yet. He knew better. The wild didn't respond to words. He sat back on the bench, let the oars drift beside him. No sudden shifts, no reaching. The bobcat's eyes opened fully now, 2 gold slivers catching the light. They didn't widen, didn't blink, just studied him with the quiet, watchful focus of a creature used to deciding whether something was threat or background noise. The space between them, no more than 15 feet, held like tension on a line. Neither moved, neither claimed the moment. It just existed. A red-winged blackbird called from the cattails. Somewhere behind them, a branch cracked under the weight of something unseen. Still, neither broke their stare. Lee saw the wound then, just enough of it. The swelling in the leg, the way the bobcat leaned slightly off one side, tail limp, chest rising too slowly. And for the first time in weeks, something unfamiliar rose in him. Not pity, not fear, just the quiet realization that he was not the only living thing too tired to run. And something in him stilled. It lasted 6 seconds, maybe 7, but it felt longer. The bobcat didn't bare its teeth, didn't bristle or growl or twitch. It only looked at him and didn't look away. That alone was strange enough. In the wild, eye contact was either challenge or curiosity, never stillness. But this was something else. Lee didn't reach for anything. He didn't shift. He didn't speak. He just returned the gaze. There were stories about animals knowing things. Fishermen talked about owls watching you too long, dogs whining before bad storms, deer standing in the road like messengers. Lee had never put stock in that. Not really. But this moment, this stare, felt like something outside explanation. The bobcat's breathing was shallow, labored, but the eyes were clear. Not pleading, never that. They were measuring him, seeing him, as if the animal had already watched men come and go, and this one was just different. Lee felt his throat tighten. It was the kind of look his son used to give him from the porch steps, when he was younger, before words could explain what he needed. A look that said, "I'm here, but I don't know how long I can stay." He hadn't known what to do with it then, and now here it was again, in a body covered in mud and silence. The skiff rocked gently beneath him. The reeds whispered with the wind. Lee didn't blink. The bobcat did first, just once, and somehow that was the answer. Not permission, not surrender, but something older, something more sacred, recognition. In the stillness across that fragile space, both wild animal and broken man understood. Neither of them had made a sound, but both had been seen. Lee let the skiff drift back half a foot, the current nudging him away like the river was giving him a chance to rethink what he was about to do. He didn't move right away. There were rules, even out here. You didn't interfere with wild animals unless they posed a threat or needed to be put down. Let nature run its course, people said. Don't project human feelings onto something built for solitude. Don't make it worse. But as he watched the bobcat's flank rise and fall, slow, deliberate, thinner than it should be, those rules felt less like wisdom and more like distance. The kind of distance people kept when they didn't know how to care anymore. Lee pulled the boat toward the bank, tying off near a weathered cypress. He moved slowly, deliberately. No sudden shifts, just the steady weight of a man who had lost enough not to fear losing more. At the edge of the dock he crouched and placed something in the shadows between them, an old metal bowl, dented from years in the shed. He filled it with water from his thermos. Clean, cold, a small offering. Then he stepped back. The bobcat didn't move. Lee knew this wasn't rescue, not yet. This was the moment before, the fragile space where choice lived. The bobcat could run, could vanish into the brush and disappear like most things did. But something in Lee, maybe the part of him that still remembered what hope felt like, needed to offer the water anyway. He stood quietly, hands at his sides, watching from a distance that still respected the wild. He wouldn't call it helping. Not yet. He hadn't earned that word. He had only placed something in the silence and waited to see if it would be accepted. The bowl remained untouched through the first hour, then the second. Lee didn't wait beside it. He knew better. He returned to the skiff and sat with his back against the dock post, close enough to listen, far enough not to press. The sun climbed higher, filtering through the bare-limbed canopy in fractured gold. Midday brought heat, and with it, flies. They landed near the wound first. That was what did it. The bobcat stirred, not in alarm, but irritation. He raised his head, flicked his ears, and slowly, painfully, shifted his weight. One paw, then another, then the leg. It buckled. He stumbled. A breath hissed from his throat, but no growl followed. Just grit. He pushed again. 3 steps. Not graceful, not fierce, but real. He made it to the bowl and drank. Each lap of water was measured, almost reverent. Lee didn't move, didn't exhale. Only watched the ribs flex beneath the fur, the way the tail barely curled when the water hit the bobcat's stomach. Then the animal collapsed, not dramatically, not with panic, just folded, like a tent pulled inward by wind. Head down, side against the moss-covered root. The breath came harder now. Lee stood. He stepped forward, boots crunching soft pine needles. The bobcat didn't lift its head. Close now, Lee could see the full shape of the leg, swollen to the joint, slick where skin had cracked, the scent of infection rising faint but sharp. This was no surface wound. Left untreated, it would kill him. Lee crouched slowly, knees aching with age and uncertainty. He didn't reach to touch. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a rag, wet it with the remaining water, laid it gently on the ground between them. Still not a rescue, but something closer, something that asked, "May I?" without saying a word. The days blurred into a rhythm, familiar, slow, and fragile. Each morning, Lee rose before the sun burned the mist from the river's edge. He'd leave a small offering, a bowl of water, a sliver of chicken breast, or sometimes just the rag soaked in cooled chamomile tea, something the vet in town once mentioned could soothe wounds without scenting too strongly of medicine. He never approached directly. He left space and time and waited. At first, the bobcat, who Lee had begun to call Ash quietly only in thought, barely moved. He would drink, sometimes eat, and crawl back beneath the lip of a broken shed beam to sleep through the heat. But slowly, things changed. By the 5th morning, the limp remained, but Ash was grooming. His tongue moved in deliberate strokes across his paw pads. By the 8th, he began dragging scraps of pine straw into a circle beside the porch, his own attempt at bedding, independent and stubborn. By the 10th, he swatted a beetle with mild interest. Lee didn't celebrate out loud. He only noticed, adjusted, sat longer in the evenings on the repaired porch swing, let his silence become less of a shield and more of an invitation. But it wasn't smooth. One afternoon, Ash didn't appear at all. The bowl remained untouched, the clearing still. Lee waited. Then he waited longer. Night came and passed without sign. It wasn't until dawn, when the wind carried a sound like damp coughing from the thicket, that Lee followed it, gently, step by step, and found Ash curled, fevered, eyes half closed, but not gone. He didn't touch him. He only sat. And in that stillness a bond formed not through rescue, but through presence. Healing, Lee realized, wasn't loud. It was made of staying. The cold broke early that year. By late April, the air softened into something gentler. Pollen dusted the windowsills, and the magnolia tree near Lee's dock opened its first reluctant bloom. The light changed too, warmer now, no longer gray. It painted gold across the floorboards each morning, just past where Ash liked to stretch out in the sun. The limp remained, but it no longer slowed him. He moved like a shadow again, low, quiet, self-contained. Not tame, never that, but rooted somehow. Less like a visitor, more like something the land had decided to keep. Lee had changed too. He spoke again, softly, mostly to himself, sometimes to Ash. Not expecting answers, just putting sound into a space that had forgotten what it was like to carry it. He fixed things. The broken swing, the screen door, even the spare bedroom where his son used to leave muddy boots and fishing poles tangled in line. He didn't fill it, but he no longer kept the door closed. The vet in town, Mara, visited once. She kept her distance, assessed Ash from the porch. "He's strong," she said quietly, "but he'll need wild again soon. You'll lose him." Lee didn't argue. He only nodded. He understood something now. Not everything that heals beside you is meant to stay. One evening, Ash walked farther than usual, past the porch, beyond the shed. He paused at the edge of the thicket, ears alert, tail low. Lee stood at the railing, hands resting on the worn wood. Ash looked back, just once, not in longing, not in fear, but as if to say, "You stayed." That was enough. And in that look, Lee saw it. He hadn't saved the Bobcat. The Bobcat had restored him. The next morning, Ash was gone. No tracks, no broken brush, no sound. Just the absence of a body that had once made the porch feel less empty. The bowl sat untouched beneath the swing, already gathering dew. Lee didn't search. He walked the trail once, quietly, boots brushing the early blooms of wild ginger. He paused near the thicket where they'd last stood together. Birds moved in the canopy. The river, somewhere beyond the trees, hummed its low, eternal rhythm. But Ash had done what wild things do. He had returned to the silence that made him. Still, the space didn't feel hollow. It felt full in a different way now, like something had passed through and reshaped the air it left behind. Lee sat on the porch that evening, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, and for the first time in over a year, he didn't feel like he was waiting for something to return. He was simply remembering something that had stayed. A glance, a choice, a moment where neither looked away. The next week, he carved a small figure from driftwood, tufted ears, low stance, long tail. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. He placed it by the dock, facing the river. He didn't call it a memorial. He didn't need to, because Ash had not disappeared. He had looked back. And sometimes that's all healing really asks for. A witness, a silence shared, a path forward, even if it leads apart. If you've ever had to let go of something that changed you, subscribe now to join others who believe some goodbyes aren't ends. They're beginnings in quieter clothes. Tell us in the comments, what silent goodbye left the deepest mark on your life?